Hi guys, I decided to make a bookshelf tour video because I had to move again, so I never really caught up on my last one after I moved, and I decided to set up my books in a different way this time, so maybe it'll give you an idea of how to set up yours, or maybe just curious of the books I have. So the way I decided to set them up is different than I've ever really done it before, although the main difference I made is just I separated my books less. So rather than setting them up by language, which is how I had them set up last time, I decided simply to categorize all my books by chronology. So starting at the earliest date, and this is my kind of literature shelf, I guess, primary text shelf. And so as you can see, it starts at the bottom left there because I don't have any bookends. So I had to start with the bookend being a stack of books. So it starts down here, Epic of Gilgamesh, and that's the Andrew George translation. I would love to get a hold of his facsimile of the tablets, published by Oxford, but it's $600, so we'll see. And then I have ancient Egyptian poems from starting around 2000 BC. And I don't have the Fagel's translation of the Odyssey. The Fagel's Iliad is the first edition I ever read of the Iliad, and it's not my favorite, but it's a nice edition, and I figured I might as well have the copy that I originally read. It's kind of interesting to look back at and see what kind of set up my mind about it. And then one difficulty with some of these early texts is the fact that when it was composed is different than when it got handwritten down or printed. So the earliest parts of the Rig Veda were composed before the Iliad was, in all likelihood. But the latest parts of the Rig Veda were composed almost certainly after the Iliad and the Odyssey were written down. So yeah, it's kind of difficult. So anyway, I just stacked them on top, and then so this edition of the Rig Veda is just totally amazing. The 3-volume published by Oxford Southeast Asia Institute by Stephanie Jameson and Joel Brereton. So if you're interested at all in Hinduism, the Vedic religion, Rig Veda, and you can swing it because it is a little expensive, I would highly recommend it. Then above that I have early Chinese poetry and then the Upanishads. And then we get over to the main selection of Greek literature plus philosophy. So this Alban Lesky edition of A History of Greek Literature is just totally amazing. I did some research, and that seems to be the best 1-volume edition of A History of Greek Literature. It's also relatively easy to come by, published by Hackett. My edition of Hesiod, Guy Davenport's 7 Greeks, awesome book. Then I have Herodotus, followed by Thucydides, Plato, Aristotle, and then I have the Mahabharata, which is, if I remember correctly, it comes from around 300 BC or so is when they think it was first set down. That is an abridged edition. I would like to get the full edition, but as you can imagine, it's pretty long, and I'm pretty sure you have to get it shipped from India. So after that, we have some lobes up top. That's the remnants of Old Latin. I don't think, maybe that makes it easier to see. So that's the 3-volume remnants of Old Latin. Lucretius, The Nature of Things, Cicero, and this series here, this Cambridge History of Classical Literature for the Latin selection is very good. I'd highly recommend it if you're interested in that. Maybe if you took a classical degree or something like that. Classics degree, wouldn't need it, but for me, it taught me a lot. Then as you can see, chronologically, we have Catullus, Horace, and then I have a decent section on Virgil, which are all good books. That first one is basically a biography. Kind of starts out with some weird stuff, but then gets into the more solidified information. And then these are my favorite translations of the early stuff, Eclogues and Georgics, and then this is my favorite translation of the Aeneid. The Oxford World Classics translation by Frederick Ahl. And then here's a very good study of Virgil, a study in civilized poetry, published by Oxford. Virgil in English, good friend, found that for me. And then some Ovid, Petronius, Seneca, Juvenal, Tacitus, and then Diogenes Laertius, so that's excellent. Kind of short biographies that continues the tradition. Later on, you get people following that same kind of style of almost aphoristic biography, a couple pages on each person, and just tells very good stories. Tales of Dionysus by Nonnus of Panopolis. This is the last classical epic. I believe it's the longest as well. And this is a group translation, kind of an interesting concept, and it was just published recently, so if you haven't heard of it, might be worth getting your hands on. Bharavi, Arjuna and the Hunter, some amazing palindromes in here, palindromic poetry. Gregory of Tours, History of the Franks. This was written in the mid-500s AD. Chronicle events, time period. And then we get to some Tang Dynasty poetry, Wang Wei, Tu Fu. I still can't find my Li Po. I have the same New Directions of Li Po, translated by David Hinton, which I really like, and I think I put it somewhere because I was reading it, and I still have, as you can see, I still have some stuff in boxes, so I'm still trying to find my edition of Li Po, but I'll put it there once I find it. And we get Po Chui, Kalidasa, the Carolingian Chronicles, which I kind of got this because I was curious about the interaction between the Christianized Franks and then the non-Christian Germanic tribes to the east that were conquered mainly in Charlemagne's time. The Irminsul cut down and things like that. You can find some information on that in there. Heliond, which is basically like a warrior poet translation of the Gospels. Jesus is basically a chieftain, and he's leading his apostles around. It's an effort to Christianize Germanic culture of the time, right around the time of Charlemagne. Other poetry that was written at the time was collected by Charlemagne. He actually did work to collect a lot of it, but it's been lost in the meantime. Poetic Edda, this is my favorite translation, by Lee Hollander. He was a professor at UT Austin when it was a good university. A quality university, I should say. And yeah, I do like Jackson Crawford a lot for what he teaches, but I don't really like his translations. I think I understand exactly what he's doing. He's kind of simplifying it, and I don't know, in my opinion, kind of dumbing it down. The Lee Hollander is written kind of in an archaic style, which at the time it was preserved, it would have felt archaic. And then we get to really the origins of my English stuff. Concise Etymological Dictionary of the English Language. It's not the full edition, but it's the best one that I found so far, in a nice quality edition. Then Old English shorter poems, Wisdom and Lyric, Beowulf manuscript, and You might notice I have some stuff missing as we go through. If it's missing, it's because it's on my favorites bookshelf, which I have two in the bedroom so I can see it. Old English Boethius, History of the Kings of Britain, and then the Carmina Burana, which is where Karl Orff's O Fortuna comes from. This is the full cycle, which I would highly recommend. It's a fascinating secular Latin poetry from around the year 1000, 1100. The Gauliards would be kind of in that range as well. As I Crossed a Bridge of Dreams, which is a work written, as you can see, 1008 AD, Japanese literature. We have Leomann's Brut in the translation by Rosamund Allen. Kind of a messed up copy, but this book, this kind of modernization is hard to come by. So, and Leomann's Brut is just old enough for it to be pretty weird. So I like to have that so I can check my translations or modernizations internally. Song of Roland, Su Tung Po, which is a Song Dynasty poet. Awesome. Burton Watson. I love this translation. The late poems of Wang An Shi, The Lord of the Panther Skin, which is by Shosta Rustaveli. It's a Georgian poet, the Georgian Golden Age, was with heavy influence from Persia. As you can imagine, the panther skin connection kind of sounds weird from Russia maybe, or from especially Western influences of Europe. Then we get into troubadours, the poems of Bertrand de Born. If you know Pound, he loved Bertrand de Born, and poetry is very interesting. Paul Blackburn's translations of troubadour poetry, Lark in the Morning. Then we get to the Minnesong, the German troubadours, basically. Walter von der Vogelweide, if I said that right. Single stanza lyrics. I also have some more Minnesong poetry, but as you can see, I kind of ran out of space. Chrétien de Troyes, Thomas Mallory, which kind of is not literally in chronological order there, but it just kind of fit. Then we have my Dante section, which is not all of my Dante stuff, but I couldn't fit all of it, so I just tried to get a representative selection. I have on the left a couple biographies and like critical biographies. The Ciardi translation, which I really like. And then an Italian, as you can see, Toynbee and Toynbee, so it's the same guy. And then La Vita Nuova. Petrarch comes next. Njál's Saga, which came around that time, early 1300s. Boccaccio, Chaucer follows. John Gower's Confessio Amantis. And then we have a bit of a gap. And we get to Boiardo, Ariosto, Erasmus, Teofilo Folengo. Lydgate's The Fall of Princes, which is a translation of John of Bacchus, which is right there. Boccaccio, Camões, and then The Laments by Kochanowski. Ronsard I tried to put near Du Bellay, but as you can see, it didn't fit. Bihari, the Satasai. I had just run across this pretty much at random. And if you're interested in checking it out, I'll just let you pause there, take a look at it. And this shelf runs until about, yeah, I get to Milton, but it's not strictly in chronological order there. But yeah, so it's almost 4,000 years of works, which is, I don't know, it's kind of terrible for me. I'm missing so much, but let's see. So then we have Arthur Golding's Ovid's Metamorphoses, Philip Sidney. I have a facsimile of his Astrophil and Stella there from 1591. Then we get to Edmund Spenser, Newton's Seneca, which is the translation of Seneca that Shakespeare would have been able to read. Then we have Thomas Nash, The Unfortunate Traveler, in a facsimile edition. Du Bartas, His Divine Weeks and Works from 1605, which almost certainly influenced John Milton's Paradise Lost. Lancelot Andrews, who went to school with Edmund Spenser under Richard Mulcaster. John Donne, which is kind of out of order here. Then I have Francisco Lopez de Ubeda, Cervantes, the Samuel Putnam translation, which is my favorite translation. It's the first one I read, and I still like it. Samuel Putnam was the father of Hilary Putnam, the philosopher. Then I have the 400th anniversary facsimile of Don Quixote de la Mancha. Coriates travel writing. He's the guy who brought the fork from Italy back to England. So we have him to thank for our forks. Then I have some other books down here that I'm trying to fit. William Dunbar, Complete Works, Scottish poet. Wace's Roman de Brute. And then Chapman's Iliad and Odyssey. But I ran out of space completely, so they would probably go around here. The King James Version of the Bible, which I just realized I have another one here out of order. The Oxford 400th anniversary facsimile, kind of similar to the Don Quixote. A selection of Elizabethan plays collected by Hazelton Spencer. This is from the early 20th century. The collection is, and it's about 35 plays. It has Chapman's historical plays, wide variety of Milton, and just all the usual suspects you would imagine. Everyone around the time of Shakespeare. And then we have two Hamlet facsimiles, one of the 1604 quarto, then another one that's the first folio, 1623. Oxford edition, a selection of essays on Shakespeare's England. There's a bunch of information on what life would have been at the time, and I found it very helpful getting an idea about the basic assumptions that Shakespeare was operating under when he was writing. My favorite edition of Shakespeare's sonnets. This is the Yale edition, edited by Booth. And on one page it has the facsimile, and then on the other page it has the transcription of it. So just exactly perfect for what I need it for. And Giles and I always get confused on that name because the problem with this name, Giles, let me see, because I had it right, and then I've heard so many people say it wrong that now I've permanently confused myself. Because in my classes we were reading The Crucible, and there's a character with that name, and also John Barth's second major novel, really, the one after Saltweed Factor. I always hear people say it wrong, and now it's confused me, and I can't remember which one is correct. But anyway, Phineas Fletcher, that has, they were Spencerian, influenced by Edmund Spenser, and they kind of continued in that tradition through the early 1600s. Anatomy of Melancholy, Baltasar Gracian, El Criticón, Pedro Calderón de la Barca. That's El Gran Teatro del Mundo, which I think is a very interesting play. the allegorical stuff. And then I end with Milton. And that's not all my Milton stuff. I have some of it on my favorite shelf, but this is just kind of the extra stuff for me. So these are my favorite editions of Milton's poetry. On the left there, the Wiley Blackwell. They are the complete shorter poems with original spelling and punctuation. There's also an edition edited by the Barbara Lewalski, as you can see on the right-hand side, that biography. She edited Paradise Lost in this same Wiley Blackwell edition with original spelling and punctuation. If you're going to read Milton, I think you have to read it in that edition, but whatever. And then prose of Milton, which I want to get a complete set of, but at the moment, that's the best I can do, to have kind of an abridged anthology of his prose. Well, that is not quite all of the stuff that I have in that time frame, but it's the majority of it. And my next shelf goes from Alexander Pope down to about the year 1900, and that's there. So I can make a video on that, and then I still need to build my third shelf that I have for this, and then that would be all my modernist stuff. And I worry that I have more than a full shelf of modernism, and that would mean that I will get all my modernist stuff up, but then I won't have any room for, I probably have a full shelf of stuff just from the year 1900 to 1940. And that's with a bunch of it already being on my favorite shelf, like all my Joyce, Proust, Musil. That's all already on my favorite shelf, so I wouldn't even have to add that, but I have quite a lot of modernist stuff still to put up. Then I need another shelf for all my more contemporary stuff. But anyway, so that's how I'm arranging my stuff. Maybe it'll give you an idea of how to arrange yours if you ever move again and have to lug all your books up a stairway. But yeah, this time I had to pay movers because it's getting out of hand. I did even kind of slim down my books quite a lot, and still it's a lot. So, well, hope you enjoyed this. Hope you got some ideas on some books you might want. And then, yeah, let me know if you want to hear about any of these other books, because I haven't read all these, but they're either books I've read and I really like, or they are kind of reference books that heavily influenced books I like, or they're books that I definitely want to get to because they've been so important for literary history or just human history in general, as you get back to something like the Rig Veda, for example. But anyway, all right. Death is a gang boss.